So the way we're going to plan this, to organise this session, is I'm going to tell you a bit about the Justice First Fellowship, the history, the background, and where we've got to. And then I'm going to bring in Claire from Avon and Bristol Law Centre and Barbara. Claire is one of the hosts of Justice First Fellowship, and Barbara is one of the Justice First Fellows. So you'll have a chance to hear from them. And then we're going to move on to James from Cass Business School, who's going to be talking about the Leadership Development Programme that Cass has developed with support from the Baring Foundation. And then we'll aim to have some time for questions. So we'll crack on from there. I'm going to sit down, actually. I can see everybody. I'm also got a balance problem that's come on since I came back, so I'm in danger of falling over, so I shall sit down and look at you. Okay. I'll tell you a bit about the Legal Education Foundation. We are a grant-making trust, relatively new. Our purpose is to advance legal education and the study of the law. But underneath that purpose, we've put a mission, and that is to help use legal education so that people can better understand and use the law. And we think that's important because law helps the people to secure fair treatment and protection. And we explore that theme through a range of grants programs that look at public understanding of the law, that look at how lawyers and people delivering legal services can be trained to do that effectively, and how we help to encourage and provide routes for people to come into being employed in the law. We have a very strong focus on research and the role that evidence plays in driving and shaping our decision-making, and also on the role of technology and how that can be developed in appropriate and effective ways. So we have a very broad programme, but one particular strand is the Justice First Fellowship, and that's what we're going to focus on this morning. It reflects a concern that the Foundation had about about the lack of training contracts for going into social welfare law, and the implications that was going to have for communities that need access to social welfare advice. We had started thinking very early on, looking at models like Teach First, and thinking about how that might apply to social welfare law. And then I went on a trip to the US, thanks to Unbound Philanthropy. Will Somerville from Unbound is in this session. And they introduced us to two very inspiring US fellowship schemes, one called Equal Justice Works and the other the Skadden Foundation. And both of those fellowship schemes have, over the last 20 or 25 years, supported social welfare / public lawyers at the start of their careers. And if you look across the legal sector in the US now, you see Equal Justice Works Fellows and you see Skadden Fellows. And it was a very inspiring examples of what you do, what can be achieved when you support people at that stage in their career. So we brought all those thoughts back to the UK, looked at other fellowship schemes that were running here, and in 2013, with initial support from Unbound Philanthropy and Esme Fairbairn Foundation, launched the Justice First Fellowship. I think this quotation from one of our trustees captures very nicely the purpose and the reason, the rationale for the programme, but also just it demonstrates the passion and the commitment that our trustees have got for this area. I'll read it out. We cannot ignore the risk that lawyers of high talent, a sense of social justice and moral commitment may not be able to train in the areas of social welfare law where help is so desperately needed and on such a wide scale. So I'll take you through how the fellowship works. It's made up of three components. The first is a 2-year fully funded training contract in a specialist social welfare agency. Now, I'm going to talk through the process for being selected, but what's key there is that we are identifying and recruiting, the best agencies in the country to host the fellows. The second component is that during the course of the training contract, the fellow gets responsibility for a project. And there are three reasons for that. One is that it elevates the 2 years above a standard training contract, so it gives it that sense of a fellowship. The second is that the project provides the fellow with some really useful program development experience, which will be of value to them as their career develops. And the third is that the project gives the host some additional capacity to develop an area of work which could go on to become the thing that employs the fellow after the support has come to an end. And I'm going to come back to that, about that sort of what happens in year 3. The final component is that, as well as the work that fellows do with their host, they're brought together as a group to receive additional training, support and development. And as partly is to help those fellows feel like they're part of a movement, part of a group of like-minded, committed lawyers. And I hope that sense of a movement will grow and be supported as those cohorts each year graduate and go on to become those future leaders. So the process for becoming a fellowship host. There are 4 criteria which organisations have to set out in an application through our website. The first is they have to show that they're an expert in an area of social welfare law. The second is that they're doing work that's of national significance. The third is that they can demonstrate that they are being very creative about their long-term sustainability. So there we're looking for organisations that are exploring how the most effective way of using the resources they've got, as well as thinking creatively about new ways to attract income, to deliver services and so on. And then the fourth is that they meet the requirements necessary to supervise a trainee, but more broadly, they can demonstrate a really strong training ethos, that commitment to supporting staff and bringing staff through. So the reason that the purpose of having criteria like that, as I said, is so that we can select the very best organisations around the country, those that are going to provide a really good experience for the fellows, that's going to put them in a good position for what happens next. The other thing I want to mention is that the largest source of income to the fellowship scheme is from a grant from the foundation. So our trustees are putting in over £600,000 a year to support this. But in order to expand the reach of the scheme, but also its credibility and prestige, we've developed a range of co-funding models. The first is that we have worked with, there's a couple of examples here of law firms who are already supporting a particular organisation, and the fellowship is an opportunity for them to leverage in additional support for that organisation and gather that around a Justice First Fellow. So the first example of that was with Child Poverty Action Group. After we'd announced the first round of fellows, I got a phone call from Mike Spencer at Child Poverty Action Group saying, "Yeah, I've seen about these fellows, why can't I have one?" So I went to see him, and we were talking about who are your existing other supporters. And Herbert Smith Freehills have been a very enthusiastic supporter of the litigation that Mike has been doing. Mike and I then went to Herbert Smith together and said, here is a potential route for Herbert Smith to increase the support that it's providing to Mike in the form of a Justice First Fellow, and that worked extremely well. Similarly with Allen and Overy, they were already very supportive of Central England Law Centre, and they have hooked their funding on support for the fellow who's now based in Coventry. The second model is the one of regional consortia. So this is on. Oh yes. So we went to law firms in Bristol and said, would you like to come together as a local consortium to support a fellow at Avon and Bristol Law Centre? And as we've got Claire and Barbara with us, they'll be able to perhaps say a little bit more about that. And we'll come back to to some of the advantages of an approach like that. Thirdly, we've looked at that we have been very fortunate to receive single donations, so Unbound and ESME, both examples of that. Really useful funds, just goes into the pot in order to support fellows in different parts of the country. The fourth is quite a clever trick which the US Foundation, the Equal Justice Works Fellowship had used, and that was to go to non-legal companies. So in the example that we've put into place here is Royal Bank of Scotland. The bank says, we're going to put some funds in. It then goes to its own panel of law firms to say, we are your important client. We'd like you to co-fund with us a fellow at this law centre that we're supporting. And the really clever trick is that the law firms pay for that from their marketing budget and not from their charity budget, as part of sustaining that client relationship. So we'd be looking to expand that approach. And then finally to mention is that the professional skills course, which many of you will know is a compulsory part of the training contract, that's being provided by BPP University. So I take you through all that, partly to show that the conversations that we're having with potential hosts and then actual hosts, we are very enthusiastic about saying what are the other sources of funding that we could bring in, that we could use the foundation's funding to leverage in. And it's not by any means a requirement. We are fully funding a number of the fellows in different places. But where there is the potential for co-funding, we are very enthusiastic about exploring that. So where are we now? We've just met the second round of fellows for the first time, which means that we've now met 18 fellows who are in place. They are based in all 4 countries of the UK. So this year we've added Law Centre Northern Ireland to complete that. One of the challenges in relation to that sort of geographical distribution has been finding potential hosts in Wales. One of our Justice First Fellows from Wales is here. There we are, she's waving. But we have really struggled to find potential hosts in Wales that are qualified and interested in taking on a fellow. The projects we now have, so there is, I should have explained, we've got 2 rounds of 9. So in round 1 we funded 9 fellows. In round 2 there are another 9. So the round 1 fellows are now over a year into their scheme. The projects that they have identified in lots of ways are extremely interesting models in their own right. You know, we have seen this as a useful added bonus, if you like. Some are looking at very sensible sources of service provision. Others are looking at really quite new models for strategic litigation. So there's a huge amount of sort of new learning and new activity that's being supported by those projects. The other thing that we're going to be doing in round 3, so that we're planning at the moment, is expanding to barristers. So we have recruited 2 sets of chambers who will take on pupils. Because of the different structure of the pupillage in comparison to the training contract, pupillage is only 1 year. In order to give parity to barristers, we have expanded the barrister fellowship to 2 years. The first year will be spent as a paid caseworker at the Bar Pro Bono unit, which we think is going to be a really interesting, useful experience for the fellow, but also very useful contribution to the unit. We're also in talks with Silex to look at how we might expand this to legal executives. So as I mentioned, round 3 planning is now underway. Our trustees have committed to fund at least another 8 fellows, but we're in co-funding discussions at the moment, so we're aiming for more. And I hope to be able to say that by this time next year, we'll have 30 fellows in place. And that starts to feel like a movement. That starts to feel like a number that we can really sort of feel is substantial. So I've mentioned the funding. So there's a commitment from us of over £1 million now. The co-funding we have drawn in about £500,000 now from 13 organisations, and are hoping to expand that this year. And round 1 fellows, I mentioned one. There's another round 1 fellow here as well, on course to complete their training contracts in 2016 or in early 2017. Now, I've put this at the bottom. You may have seen that an article in The Guardian about the fellowship, which was completely wonderful. It was a brilliant article, and it captured the passion and commitment that the fellows have. And then a very kind sub-editor chose to give the article a headline, Legal Aid equals career suicide. So it's become a hashtag for the fellowship team, hashtag career suicide. What, of course, we are demonstrating is that it's not. We have been bowled over by the passion, commitment, skill, effectiveness of the people that are applying for the scheme. bowled over by the skill, passion, effectiveness of the host organisations. And what we are demonstrating is that choosing to focus in this area of law is absolutely not what the Guardian headline writer put, but the absolute opposite. So there are a few things that I'll say in conclusion, but I'm now going to pass over to Claire Carter from Avon and Bristol Law Centre, who will tell you a little bit about what the fellowship scheme is like, what the scheme feels like from the point of view of a host.
Thanks, Matthew. Firstly, just to make the obvious point, I guess, that it's a fantastic opportunity, and I'm not just saying that because I'm sharing a platform with Matthew. It's part of our organisational strategy that we support and develop social welfare lawyers of the future, and that's all very well to say, but actually quite difficult to do without these kinds of opportunities. There's not much we can be sure about when we look to the future, but I think one thing that we would all agree is that the need for the work that we're doing isn't going to go away. And that means that Bristol will always need a law centre, and I certainly won't be running it in 30 years' time, and hopefully Barbara or somebody like her will be. So I think, and Matthew's talked about the importance of the reason for the fellowship, but I think it bears repetition. There are two other things I think that are worth touching on in terms of the benefits to our law centre and to all the host organisations, I'm sure. The first one is just the simple increase in capacity that having a full-time trainee solicitor on staff gives us. And again, I'm sorry if that sounds obvious, but I think it's worth touching on. As we all know, given the current funding climate, being able to recruit a full-time, bright, young social welfare lawyer is not an easy thing to do. And I'm not going to embarrass Barbara too much, but obviously just a little bit, by saying in the course of your 2 years with us, you will achieve a huge amount of positive outcomes for clients who we simply would not be able to act for. This is a significant increase in capacity for us and will enable us to help people that otherwise wouldn't be helped. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. And the other benefit, which Matthew's touched on, I'll just elaborate on a little, is the relationship with the private sector. We're very fortunate in Bristol to have a really good relationship with our local law society and with a number of our law firms. But to be honest, I have been struggling to find ways of turning that positive support and kind words at various events into hard cash. And this has given us the opportunity to do that, frankly. And now that we have this relationship with the 4 major firms in Bristol, I'm finding that other senior partners of some of the other major firms are kind of wondering what they're missing out on, which is exactly what we were hoping to achieve. And so I'm building relationships now with some of the other firms in Bristol, and hopefully we'll have a bigger consortium of supportive firms. But it has a bigger effect than that. And I'm actually going back to Bristol this afternoon because I have a meeting with Osborne Clarke because they are interested in supporting the development of our employment pro bono work. And that offer has come off the back of conversations we've had around Justice First. TLT, another one of our co-funding firms, is hosting a major event for us in 2 weeks' time with 150 people cross-sector coming to talk about the future of advice in Bristol. Who knows what will come of that? But I know that opportunity wouldn't have arisen if this relationship hadn't been developed. So I think it's about the benefit to ABLC as an organisation and our sustainability. There's a benefit in developing social welfare lawyers of the future. There's a benefit to our clients who simply wouldn't be being helped. But also there's this ongoing relationship with the private sector, which will only to be all of our benefit, really. So I think that's kind of all I want to say on the benefit to the law centre, and I'll just hand over to Barbara, who can tell you a bit about benefit to you.
Hello everyone. I'm Barbara. I self-funded my LPC. I graduated in 2012, and then I've always wanted to do social welfare law. And for most people in my position, you self-fund your LPC. So I self-funded that part-time over 2 years in the hope that maybe I'll find a training contract in my ideal career, which is social welfare. So when I saw the Justice First Fellowship, I did apply for it, and I would say it's such a good opportunity and a good platform, because there are people who are passionate about it. But like, I'll speak specifically about myself. In the past 3 years, I've worked in the third sector, so I've had to do a lot of volunteering. But you get to a point where that's not viable, because you do need to sustain yourself, and the fellowship is such a good opportunity for you to do something that you're passionate about, but also increase your professional development. So at the moment, I'm at Avon and Bristol Law Centre, and I'm doing my CT in Employment and Discrimination. And I've only been there 2 months, but I've learned a lot. And I think the fellowship in itself gives a good support network. We had a conference in February where I met the other fellows, and all of us are doing projects on different aspects of social welfare law. My project is on looking at a sustainable income stream. So I'm specifically looking at legal expenses insurance, and as my seat is in employment, trying to see whether we can implement that and use that in employment, because employment, as most of us know, is completely out of scope for legal aid. So my project is looking into that, and it's currently in its research phase. And I would say so far, I've learned a lot over the past 2 months, and I'm very, very optimistic about the next 2 years. So, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Barbara. We'd be very happy to take questions. I think with time, we should, at this stage, press on straight away to James and Ruth.
Thank you.
So we'll come back to this before the end of the session.
Thank you. Can we get our slides up?
Yeah, I'll call it some of
Thank you.
Claire, do you want to?
You're looking at a Mac using technophobe, so this is a recipe for disaster. How do I?
You start speaking, and I'll find it for you.
Okay, so it's
David told
on
me
the
where it was.
PowerPoint slides, and it's at the bottom. Thank you. Ruth's introducing it.
Yes, I've probably got the very easy bit of not having to cover any of the real detail. But I'm delighted to have been asked to become the independent chair of the advisory board for the new leadership development programme within the social legal advice sector. One of our key tasks will be to develop a slightly snappier title, as that does not run off the tongue. This is a really new initiative, so James will be talking through what the programme will look like, how it will work, how people can apply. It's fantastic to have the opportunity to be here today at an event like this to raise the profile and inspire people, hopefully, to go back and talk to people to apply themselves. And really, this is a sort of complementary programme because it's aimed at people who've already got a leadership role in the sector. And certainly, I think the role of the sector is changing. The nature of the pressures clients are under are changing enormously. The funding landscape has shifted dramatically in the last few years. And there is a real desire to invest in a cohort of people who can effect change, who can lead that within their own organisations, who can adopt a leadership role within communities. And we'd very much hope that this programme will sit alongside the Justice First fellowship programme and help to create a real movement for change across social welfare law.
Thanks, Ruth. Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and huge thanks to Ruth for taking on the rather daunting role as chair of the advisory group. I'm James Barrett. I'm based at CAS, Centre for Charity Effectiveness, which is part of CAS Business School. We're a tiny thing that they're very proud of, but we're this tiny institution attached onto the much bigger business school. I run lots of open access leadership programs and some bespoke leadership programs. So we've just finished a 3-year cohort for the student union movement for permanent staff of student unions. So this is really exciting, and I've been having so many excited conversations with my colleagues. I have a stinking cold, so I'm slightly worried that my passion won't come across as well as it's intended. I was interviewing someone for one of the leadership programs yesterday on the phone, and after this rather long conversation, she said, as we finished off, she said, has anyone ever told you, you have the voice of a hypnotherapist? As I struggled through my cold. So when you all wake up, the cuts to legal aid will all have been a horrible dream. Anyway, so a year ago, just over a year ago, I was at the last conference here, which was hugely inspiring and exciting and had a very big influence on the shape of this program. At the end of 2014, Barings commissioned us to scope a program for the social welfare legal advice sector. And I spent one of the most exciting times over the Christmas holidays with colleagues of mine who'd done the interviewing, phoning each other up and emailing each other and writing this much longer report than we had commissioned to do, because this is so exciting and so crucial. And we're in a very strange sort of limbo period right now, because our advisory group is meeting later in March and will set some of the more detailed frameworks for how we go about recruiting people for the program. So this is part of a dialogue. CAS, I hope, brings lots of leadership knowledge, and this is about a conversation with your sector about leadership development. I'm going to blitz through it, and in many ways this is going to feel phenomenally superficial after all the information we've been given, but I'll do my best. So it's specifically for the sector. It's funded, the delivery of the program is funded both by the Baring Foundation and was one of the final grants of the John Paul Getty Jr. Charitable Trust as well. We're delivering it. It's 2 12-year programs starting in June. Sorry.
It's intense.
Yeah, every day for 12 years. Thank you. That's why you need a good chair. And it's open for, in total, somewhere between 50 and 60 senior leaders, chief execs and senior leaders from across England and Wales. It's free to participants, and national travel and accommodation expenses are covered, which is phenomenal and throws up all sorts of issues about how you do that fairly, but I'm really pleased we're able to do that. And we're really looking forward to working very closely with the advisory group on making sure that it sort of fits the sector very exactly. So you will know all of this stuff, so just to say it out loud, when we scoped the program, various things came up very crucially, very central themes to how this needs to be delivered. First of all, that there's an exceptionally high regard for the sector and for social justice. And what's intriguing in all of the debates about cutting your services, what never came up was any idea that what you do is ineffective. So it's never been cut on the grounds of ineffectiveness. And I think that's crucial to this program. That it needs to be appreciative and aligned to everyone's passionate commitment to using the law. And there's a real recognition, and as has already been said by your key speaker this morning, about cuts threatening the very stability of the sector. My colleagues and I at CAS sat down to try and think of any equivalent sector that's gone through this level of cutbacks and change, and we couldn't identify any that came close to what you're experiencing at the moment. At the same time, there are some phenomenal organizations, which many of you represent here today, that have done astonishing things despite the context. And we really want to build on that and not see this as a deficit model and not see this as a critique of the sector. This is about appreciating what your organizations have done despite the context. That the task is to sort of build and learn from people who have done phenomenal work, and to try and tap into underutilized capacity without pretending that there is a huge amount of that available. So the key bits really that we've identified is the importance of working with yourselves as a whole system, not just sheep-dipping individual leaders to make them better leaders. That it needs to be part of a portfolio of interventions, not just a leadership program. Targeted to people at the top of the organizations who are committed to change and already part of the change debate. We went round the houses thinking about how do you include people in lower ranking leadership roles. And the reality is from all of our leadership programs that if you don't work with people at the top of the organizations, it's futile training more junior people because they get sent back into their organizations, fired up, under-supported and get utterly frustrated and tend to leave. So it's very much about building leadership for the sector, and encouraging leaders to develop more leadership, not more followship. Okay. Ooh, I've just lost a... Okay. I've just jumped a page, apologies. So what are the qualities of outstanding sector leaders? What's lovely about this is I'm very passionate about the sorts of topics that are on this slide. And when we first went into scoping this program, I had a sort of a wobble thinking, do we need much more technical skills, much more financial skills? Do we need to really kind of, does this program need to come in really heavy on some of the hard, tough skills, financial acumen for the sector? And what was intriguing was that we asked people in our interviews, who are the outstanding leaders in the sector? Who do you most admire? Who's doing the most extraordinary work in the sector at the moment despite everything? And what are their qualities? And these were the qualities that came up as the ones that are crucial for developing. And what you'll notice is that they are predominantly what gets fobbed off as the soft skills of leadership. And actually they're ultimately phenomenally very hard and most effective and most crucial to powerful leadership development in the 21st century. A number of names kept cropping up as outstanding leaders in the sector, and they were described as being value-based, analytic and visionary, strategic, having lots of sophisticated soft skills to connect with the motivations of their followers, that they're able to build phenomenal partnerships and collaborations, and that they're resilient, confident, and great communicators. For those of you who like competencies, we've developed a very intricately detailed table of competencies and how you develop them in our report, but this is the sort of headline version of this, so I hope it makes sense. Okay. In terms of what the program must achieve, for those who are pedants about output and outcomes and impact, the impact of the program is about, ultimately, is about focusing on end users. And I didn't want to sound too banal by saying that, but ultimately this program is about better services to more people in the sector who have the greatest level of need. And if you're pedants about outputs and outcomes, the first half are outputs and the second half are outcomes, and we've developed a log frame which is very kind of detailed account of how this must work. But first of all, what it must produce is a talented cohort of people who are passionate about sharing, committed to developing more leadership, not followership, with expertise to develop innovative, sustainable organizations to meet demand even more effectively, with greater confidence, resourcefulness, and influence, and the powers and levers to achieve positive change. As a result, the outcomes would be networks of support and reach across a wider advice in non-profit sectors and into civil society more broadly. A collaborative, externally facing mindset which places the needs of beneficiaries above the goals of individual organizations. We run a very extraordinary program for what we refer to as sophisticated leaders, who are the sort of the hacks of the charity sector, who are blazing a trail and a bit sort of fed up with all the other leadership programs that we run. And their constant mantra is the importance of putting mission before organization. That we have, it's shocking to be reminded this morning about advice deserts in these countries, in our countries, and we have to be able to address that and address that through the program. And there also needs to be continuity, consistency, and clarity in the face of unrelenting disruption. So I hope that makes sense. In terms of the outline of the program, it's going to be hard to try and capture all of it in a minute or two. But just to say that there's several ingredients to the proposed program for the year, and it's based on a number of other programs that we've run. First of all, there are 3 residential events for the whole cohort, which includes a blend. It feels like there are 2 components to this program. And one is a whole lot of elective topics, which are kind of high-level taught topics on expert topics that people need want to get to grips with. But the other half of it is about whole systems exercises. So it's actually about having the entire cohort in the room with advisory group members, really trying to map the sector and understand the sector and work with leadership and context. What leadership follows from the environment that you're in? Constantly relating that back as a conversation between participants and ourselves. It's also envisaged that the cohort will be divided into 4 regions, and there will be 3 regional events, day-long events involving action learning to really tackle the issues that people are most concerned about. Road trips to visit different organizations and actually learn through being in the organizations about the particular issues there. Think tanks to tackle high-level issues, and guest speakers both to reinforce the network and to open doors into other sectors. Personal development is always a hugely important part of our programs, and we use the Work Foundation's Outstanding Leadership Framework, which is an evidence-based piece of research into what differentiates outstanding leaders from merely good leaders. So we'll be using that in coaching, mentoring and shadowing, not just reinventing mentoring and shadowing, because there's plenty of it about, but actually trying to align the existing programs so that they're more joined up and there's more consistency and continuity. And then what we found increasingly is the importance of having sort of closer booster events. So the very final event is about marking the learning and evaluating the program for year 2. And then because this is about building a cohort, we would see people from cohort 1 being able to participate in aspects of cohort 2. Final slide, just to say, advisory group meets later this month to finalize the recruitment process. No pressure on you. Recruitment processes and selection processes. And then in April, the program will be promoted very widely within the sector. Shortlisting in May for a June start with a June residential, and the first one will be in London. So I hope that's helpful. Please, if this jars in any way, please let us know so that we can make it fit. If you're excited by it, please spread the word and encourage people to sign up to it.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Ruth. Okay, we'll hand it over to you guys for the last section of the session. Any questions? Steve.
Hi, Steve Hines from Legal Action Group. Really interested in the leadership programme. A couple of questions really. What do you mean by the sector? Because the sector includes Citizens Advice and Advice UK, but very often there are different types of services and aims. And also, I would give you a warning, don't undervalue legal skills and casework and strategic legal skills as well. It's a really important part of the law centres movement, and sometimes the rest of the sector likes to avoid the word legal even. Well, I think there's leadership around legal skills that needs to be done, and strategic legal skills as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to say we have, in reflecting on the advisory board, we have thought about that. It is properly the work of the board, who are meeting shortly, to look at the eligibility criteria. But we did flag up in original conversations with Bearings that our view is, by the sector, we mean an engagement in providing legal advice as a key part of an organisation. And I think that is quite important. Given that the sector is changing, given the kind of new models that are emerging of merged organisations, organisations working slightly differently, we want to take account of that. But for it to be useful, I think it has to be quite focused on a very specific type of work. Otherwise, it does become a more generic programme that doesn't highlight that and doesn't wrestle perhaps with some of the very particular issues about how we deliver specifically legal provision to communities in the current climate.
So who's the sector then?
It's organisations that provide legal advice and casework. And actually, I think we are envisaging casework, not just advice. But the board hasn't yet determined what the criteria would be, and I don't, there will genuinely be a conversation that will take
I
that will
don't
take
mind
that
talking to
view.
you about it.
And-
Social views more than everybody else.
Thanks, Steve.
And probably worth saying that citizens' advice are included in this process. We've already done quite a lot of leadership development work with citizens' advice, and recognise that different subsectors will have very different levels of investment in this, and some will be more self-defined and some will be more part of a wider identity.
Great. Deborah.
Hiya. I did your student union leadership development.
Oh,
program, and I was just wondering if you're just keeping this one just to chief execs, or if you, because you had 3 tiers, didn't you?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
had
yeah.
like low staff, and then like me, and then you had middle managers, and then chief execs, and that was dead helpful because we all got to like sit together and talk to each other.
Yeah.
Or is this just for is this for like the highest level?
This is the student union program was for emerging leaders, senior leaders, and chief executives. It threw up really interesting issues about how you meet each of those needs. So that was intriguing stuff for a wider conversation, and threw up quite big issues about people not wanting to identify as emerging leaders. So it was a fascinating one to navigate. With this one, it's about the fact that there are so few places and that there's a different task. So the task of this one is to really focus strategically on the overall strategic direction of the sector, and to work with people who have the highest level of influence within their organizations. It also, interestingly, doesn't include trustees at all. So in this one, there won't be emerging leaders, or we haven't recommended that emerging leaders be involved, because we see it as creating a context for leaders, senior leaders, to go back to their organizations and make things happen for emerging leaders. But we agonized over that, so I hope I've done the argument justice.
Great. We'll go to Patrick first, then to James.
Welcome to both programmes. It sounds very exciting. With the Justice First Fellowship, we're finding it increasing from South West London Law Centres to recruit caseworkers and solicitors now. And we found that taking on trainees is a way of us developing people staff and kept quite a good record of keeping on trainees. And it's interesting the co-funding element of it, because we have had secondments from firms in the past. Those seem to dry up because we're too effective, because the people who come to secondments change their careers. And the other programme, there is a dearth of actual kind of the leadership training you're talking about to the sector. So you kind of learn on your job, and it's you actually now need to learn more of those other skills to actually really change, because the pace of change has increased so dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Patrick. James.
Yeah, I just want to ask, is, it's one set of kind of skill sets or kind of outcomes you might look at in terms of leadership development. Is what I don't see here is sort of, obviously you talk about casework and advice, but very, very important, but also particularly leadership context of having a wider impact in terms of social policy and advocacy, whether that's on a local level with local government or with a range of different service providers. And I mean, I've worked since advice for over 10 years, and part of our kind of equal mission was about doing social policy and having, because those strategic interventions benefit more people than individual casework, and might be just something as small as being able to say to local body to kind of employ nice bailiffs rather than nasty bailiffs, or but there's a whole range of leadership skills that are kind of needed to be able to produce those kind of interventions and changes. I just wanted to kind of get your take on what thinking is about how leadership can support the sector to do effective social policy and advocacy work.
That was wonderful as well. I think that it's hard to do justice to your question, hard to do justice to lots of these questions here, so I hope I'm not going to sound too simplistic. I think that two issues. It's really important that this is a leadership development program, not a skill set program for the sector. So where I think the boundaries sit are, this is about strategic thinking about those topics, not about developing those things on the program. So there are two features to it. This has to be about strategic interventions and strategic and tactical thinking. So I think I'm endorsing what you've just said. What this mustn't be is skills development in relation to legal advice, if that makes sense. This has to be about the leadership component of it, recognizing that there are other things going on in the sector which will address that and engage with that, with what you're describing. But certainly it has to be about, part of leadership is about sort of stepping away from the coalface and from firefighting and thinking much more strategically about what are the policy issues and how exactly do we do this and how exactly do we go about that and to what extent can we use the law tactically rather than directly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, sorry, could I just
Yeah,
chip in, which I think is picking up on Patrick's point, which is a lot of people have kind of ended up in leadership roles without ever having had any kind of leadership development programme or access to that. But we are hoping very much in the way that the Justice First cohort is an identifiable cohort with a lot of peer learning and a focus on more that it's not simply funding training contracts or pupilages, it's about a much broader, that we are very much hoping that the cohort of people participating, together with the advisory board who will be coming along and encouraged to come along to some of the events, will also start to create the space for people to take away collaborations around policy work, around new ideas or new programmes. And the focus of the programme is the leadership development, but one of the outcomes we would hope would be the stimulation of new pieces of work arising from it.
This mustn't be treated as a sheep dip leadership program. This has to be embedded. And this has to, sorry, it's a horrible sorry, someone in the front row chuckling. This isn't about making good individuals. This is about getting key leaders in the sector to think really strategically and really thoughtfully about how you can maximize the impact that you have as leaders and connect up with all the other resources that are in the sector, or connect up the rare and few resources in the sector most effectively.
That's really clear from your list of skills and attributes which you uncovered from the consultation, wasn't it? It's those principles that you're helping to flourish. Yeah. Yes, up at the back, please. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, my name is Frida. I'm interested in the Justice First Fellowship scheme, and I'm particularly interested in that it's expanding to include pupils. I myself come from a socially disadvantaged background. Fortunately for me, and by God's grace, my funded my bar course, completed my bar course, and I would like some advice on how to practice in social welfare law, and if there are any opportunities for my need to practice in the bar and social welfare.
Terrific. Yes. Well, I'll have a go at that straight off. Firstly, I'll be very happy to have a chat afterwards. The opportunities for barristers in the next round of the fellowship will be publicised on the website shortly. We've recently selected 2 chambers, Pump Court in London and St John's Chambers in Bristol. So we're just finalising timetables, but at some point in the next couple of months, that opportunity will be publicised both on our website and on the Pupillage Gateway, the Bar Council's Pupillage Gateway, and with full details of how to go about applying to be selected. But, you know, I'd love to have a longer conversation, so shall we chat afterwards? Paul, saw your hand.
Yeah,
Thanks, David.
I had a question around the leadership development programme. I just wondered your thoughts were really, one of the problems you see sometimes in charities that sort of lawyers don't always see the value of being managed by non-lawyers. And that's the same in private practice. It is in the charity sector, but it's perhaps, I don't think with any basis, but it's a problem that is perhaps particularly common in the law sector too, which has a history of being organised as collectives, where lawyers manage themselves. And I just wondered, it seems to me that's probably one of the key problems, and if you have thoughts on how you could address that.
It's lovely having
and I know
advisory
someone else has got
chair.
their hand up. It is something we've thought about, and I think it chimes a bit with Steve's point about needing to create space for people to look at the specifically legal aspects. As law centres particularly, although it's probably true of Advice UK members as well, have very, very different models of working. And so I think there is something quite interesting about how the programme can acknowledge that and work with that. And we've had some early conversations, and again, because this is quite early in the process, the advisory board's away day will be looking at criteria. And I think one of those is what counts as a leadership role within a collective, what counts as a leadership role where perhaps everybody is doing casework, but some people are also fulfilling other functions. And I don't think there's an easy answer to some of that, but I think trying to look at how that happens. And I also think it's true there are some amazing lawyers who never want to do anything else except be brilliant lawyers, and that's fine. But there are some fantastic lawyers who never quite get a chance to develop some of the other contact skill sets, reflection, and we would hope that the programme would do that.
That's great. I think, David, do you want us to...
Yeah, we've got quite a few people waiting outside.
Okay,
Oh, the feel the power.
if anybody like any more information, do come and take. And we also have a little leaflet here on the fellowship scheme if you'd like to take that away. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.